Yo, what's going on, everybody? Welcome
We're
back.
live early. You all
Yeah.
should be impressed.
We are not on time. We are early.
Yeah, that's never happened.
That tells you how dedicated we are to you guys.
Exactly.
That we are
You
here.
I left the gym early for this.
I haven't even gone to the gym yet. I'm going after this. That's the funny thing.
You skipped it.
Because I walk to the gym from where I live, right? So, and it's about a 3-mile walk one way, and it's a 3-mile walk on the way home. So it's about a 6-mile round trip, and it takes me about 2 hours to do that round trip. And I'm like, okay, I need to allot myself 3 hours, 2 hours to get there and back, and also an hour for my workout, right? So I'm not going to rush in the middle of the day to try to get that done. And while prepping for this topic that we're doing today, like, I wanted to be really refreshed in the content. I didn't want to just kind of wing it, because I think what we're going to be talking about today is really important. And I wanted to keep the material fresh on me. So I'm going to go after we do our stream.
Oh, nice.
And plus I have legs.
Oh man. I did that yesterday, so I'm feeling it today.
Yeah. I was like, can I just, shoulder press 285 again and just skip legs altogether?
Can't skip leg day. It's the most important day.
I know. Who are you kidding? Right. So, but today you guys seen us talk a lot about this. We are going to be reviewing Pastor Mike Foster's It's Good to Be a Man, chapter 1 and chapter 2. And give you guys just some context of this, why I chose this book. Full disclosure, I know Mike Foster. I don't know him personally. We don't hang out and smoke cigars or go hunting or anything like that. But a friend of mine plugged me into talking with him about it in December, and him and I had a really good conversation. He told me about his book. I bought the book then. I think I bought the audio version of it, and I listened to him on Man Rampant with Douglas Wilson, and I really liked the work that he said, what he was saying. It was very similar to what we talk about when it comes to the problems with men in the church. And you guys know that we're in this red pill space, but the way I look at it, it's more of a men's ministry. What the Iron Disciples do, what I do, I think it's more of a men's ministry. We really don't talk about, banging chicks or doing anything like that. We really try to talk to you guys about how to level yourselves up from a biblical worldview with a red pill lens, how to utilize the tools that the red pill gives you and still be within your biblical worldview, so you're not causing yourself to sin or straying away from God, what God's true desire for you is. But it's okay, how do we live this desire out that God has for us and utilize all the tools that are at our disposal?
And I think it's cool. I would recommend you all get this book. Plug for Mr. Mike Foster, even though we're not getting anything out of it.
Yeah, we're not getting affiliates.
No, there's no affiliates going on here. But I think the cool thing about Mike Foster is he's a pastor.
Yeah.
And he gets the red pill. So he's one of the few pastors that you can read it in his work, and if you listen to him online or see his Twitter, you get it that he gets the red pill.
Yeah.
So he knows all the topics. I'm pretty sure he's read, Rational Male. He seems very familiar with it. He was one that was always kind of debating the infamous Dalrock in his blog posts.
Yeah.
And so, there's disagreements to be had, of course, but I think he's a great resource in the Christian like pastor area of this space.
Yeah, I think that I think that it's notable that him and Del Rock used to trade paint on, a lot of topics, and I can't remember all of them, but I can definitely see that in this body of work, I think Del Rock may have positively influenced him, even though he doesn't mention Del Rock in any form. But it's hard to assume that because there's a lot of things that from the Del Rock blog posts that seem a lot different than what we're reading in here. And I think that might have been like, an epiphany stage or, just some type of enlightenment in conversation, or maybe his position changed from when he used to debate with Del Rock than to where he is now in life. And that's acceptable. That's good. Right. We have to be ever changing and ever evolving. Our opinions will change over time on certain things. Doesn't make that you were wrong or right. It's just in that perspective in your life, that's what you believed. And then as God revealed things to you through life experiences, you have come to a different conclusion.
If you don't change your mind, then what are you even kind of doing in your life?
Yeah.
Like, man, when I was younger, I was like a blue pill retard.
So it's like, so I wanted to give a huge shout out to Mike Foster for this book. We're going to start with chapter 1. Right. And so what we have here is like we have the book, right? But we also have the study guide, you guys. So I got the study guide and I'm going to read the summary of each one that we're going to cover. And then me and Mike are going to talk about some of the things that we liked about that first chapter. And then I'm going to read the highlight version in the study guide. And then we're going to go through some questions and some scripture. Okay. So the summary is men are made to rule. It's not a question of patriarchy versus something else. It is a question of good or evil patriarchy. Which men will rule? Wicked patriarchies like Pharaoh and Absalom want to harness, pacify, and destroy men. In response, the church's own patriarchs, Nehemiah, with the sword to defend and a trowel to build, must rise up to shepherd our generation of fatherless men. As the church goes, so society goes. That's basically the summary of chapter 1. What were some key points, Mike, from chapter 1 that you found that kind of stuck out to you?
Well, the one thing I love is the opening line is patriarchy is inevitable. God has built it.
Yeah,
like,
that was a good line.
Yeah, like he kind of goes in, like there's no existence of matriarchies in human history really, and it's just an inevitable way God designed the world is patriarchy.
Yeah,
and I think he I'm gonna just read this spot kind of that he says this is so patriarchy is the natural and inevitable state of the world. But just because something is natural doesn't mean that it will always be virtuous. Good things can be perverted by sin, whereas unnatural things are always evil because they are contrary to God's design. Natural things, though created good, can nonetheless be turned to unnatural ends. And so if we look at where we're at now, like if God designed things to be, as like we like term biblical patriarchy, the world, especially in our culture, Western culture, they're flipping this script on kind of trying to make things a matriarchy, and that is outside of God's design. And as he says here, stuff contrary or that is unnatural is contrary to God's design, and I think the results speak for itself.
Yeah, no, and if you look at it furthermore, like he uses a perfect example, right? When he talks about homosexuality, right? He goes, homosexuality desires are always wrong. Heterosexuality desires were designed to be good. Yet every man knows how his flesh turns those desires towards that which is against God's law. For a man to be attracted to a woman is natural, but for a man to lust after her is sin. So patriarchy in itself was never good nor evil. It's how it's utilized that makes it good or evil. Is the patriarchy, pointing to God as the ultimate authority, and are men trying to model themselves after God's character and emulate his, character the best they can? I would say that would be a good patriarchy. A bad patriarchy or an evil patriarchy is when the attention that the man is trying to get is directed solely about himself. How does this, how do I get to rule over people? And then when you get people that are like an evil patriarchy, they don't want other men to rise up. You are a threat. A good patriarchy is not threatened by other good men rising up. But
I think a good thing, like a good example, is good patriarchies are often built upon, and we're saying good in like kind of the modern sense, like it'd be like the hierarchy structure that we have today in society, which is supposed to be a quote meritocracy.
Yeah.
Obviously, factors of culture and stuff influence that, but that's the ultimate goal. Like you earn the role that you have in the hierarchy, you earn it. And the toxic version of that patriarchy is that the men at the top use tyranny to stay in their role.
Yeah.
And their competence is irrelevant.
Yeah, and we kind of see in this book, and especially chapter 1, he highlights two biblical characters, right? He first talks about Absalom. And I kind of like, Mike, do you want to kind of like break down Absalom?
Yeah, let me turn to that spot over here. Because I had spot. So Absalom was one of David's sons, the kind of the troublemaker one. He was trying to undermine the kingdom by basically getting the people to turn on David and pick him. Let's see, one of the spots I kind of highlighted here. Absalom was able to steal the kingdom from David by stealing the hearts of the men. Mm-hmm. He invested time in them and took an interest in them, sided with them, and defended them. So, I mean, an example too is he correlates that today on how often, how especially influencers are kind of fulfilling that role of, if we want to view King David maybe as the church or God in some sense, that influencers are sweeping in, especially like an Andrew Tate, and fulfilling that role and stealing the hearts of men.
Yeah. And it's, in a way, you could say, well, is it deceitful the way that they do it? Or is it really malicious, or do they actually genuinely care, right? These Absaloms that he mentions, because they give out a lot of good information, but the information,
where are they pointing? Where are they
exactly
pointing?
That's where I said, like, a good patriarchy points back to God, right? An evil patriarchy points to individual, right? So Absalom's point to me, right? Like, look what I could do. I could do this for you. If I was your king, all of you guys would have your cases heard, and I would be just with you, and I would weigh on your side. I feel your pain. I know your struggle. You're right. Women ain't this. All women are this. Like, that's what we're hearing from these Absaloms of today. Right. And so they gain the attention, and they gain the love, the heart of the people who are hurting, who feel like they're not being heard, or they feel like they're not being treated justly. Right. And then here is this figure that is saying, hey, I'm fighting for you guys. I'm fighting. I'm with you. Right. And, like you said, Andrew Tate is a perfect example in this case, because it's like, Andrew Tate says all the things that guys wish somebody else would say, right?
He says them all, and then he embodies the stuff. Like,
Exactly.
he's like the finished product of what these red pill guys are even talking about with money, muscles, and game.
So it's like, oh, that's the model that we need to model after. I want to be like a Tate. I want to be like an Absalom, right? And that's a false god. Right. So that's a great example of an evil patriarchy. He also references Pharaoh as like an evil patriarchy, right?
Just tyranny in the end.
Exactly. There's tyranny in the end. And he highlights, there's three things that evil patriarchies tend to do, right? And
targeting young men.
In targeting young men, right? Exactly. Or just targeting men in general. It doesn't have to be necessarily young men, but just men in general. They try to harness them. Why waste all that masculine energy? After all, it could be turned toward the ends of the evil patriarch. This is the first impulse of any patriarch, since he is a leader of men, regardless of how wicked or righteous he is. Most nations have done this to some degree through enculturation, education, especially patriotism, military service, and formal schooling. Right? So we see that whether good patriarchy or bad patriarchy, we always see that they always want to harness men's masculinity and funnel it into where it's beneficial to their goal, right?
And it's like, I think a good example of that is like, Germany back in the day. If you read the book Ordinary Men, you see how they harnessed these ordinary men into doing heinous stuff.
Yeah. And then the second part is he says, like, they pacify them, right? So if the energy of men cannot be harnessed by evil patriarchy, it is often sapped by channeling them into pursuits that leave them impotent to rebel. This could be done by putting them to work as slaves, like Pharaoh did. Pharaoh couldn't harness them, the men. So what he did is he enslaved them and made them work so hard to where they were so exhausted and beaten down. By the end of the day, they didn't have the energy to uprise. They didn't have the energy to resist him, right? But often it's by offering them bread and circuses, fruitless pursuits to escape into, rather doing the hard work of fighting. So here we go. Porn, OnlyFans, sexting, video games. Those are all ways to pacify men, right?
Weed,
drugs, alcohol, all forms of pacifying men. Rollo likes to call it sedations. Yep. And it's true. It is sedation, but it is a form of pacifying men.
Right? I would say sport, like, he brought up the kind of the quote. I think it was, I remember I posted this recently because I kind of have this view of sports, but sports is really a way to pacify men.
Oh yeah.
Like the obsession men have with sports and like it drawing all their attention and interest and the behavior it gets out of men. It's like,
oh yeah. Like if you seen, like I've seen guys will fight over their team losing.
Yeah. Well, just like, look what they do in like, especially some of the crazy, like Philadelphia. They're like flipping cars over after a sports match, or some of those soccer matches that just turn into brawls. Like,
yeah. Now, mind you, I don't watch soccer very much, and I don't have a team. But I would so be down to go to one of those like English pubs in London, right, and watch a brawl. Like,
just some good people watching.
Yeah, I'm totally down for that. It's even following your favorite content creator is pacifying men. YouTube has become a source of pacifying men. You watch shows where they're like, oh, women ain't shit, or look at these hoes, they dress scantily clad, we're gonna kick them off the channel, or we're gonna talk to them about their sexual exploits, and we're gonna get all like that's a form of pacifying men.
It's kind of like a new sport to watch.
It is, and so if they can't harness men, we're going to entertain them with this fruitless information that is not going to get them any further to where they ought to be, or any further where they could be, and it's not going to take away their problems, and it's easy to control men like that, right?
Yeah, at least keep them distracted from the real issues of life.
Exactly.
And then the third.
Yeah, go ahead to the third.
So if those options don't work, the last one is to destroy them. And he says here, young men who cannot be harnessed or pacified must be crushed. They are too dangerous to an evil patriarchy to be allowed to live. This is why the most godless regimes are always the most murderous. Communism is well known for its ruthless hunt for dissidents in its own ranks, typically men. Pharaoh was determined to kill every baby boy among the Hebrews, even though it would decimate his labor force. Herod, too, sought to have young Jesus killed by slaughtering the innocent. And I remember when I was on a tour in Rome, our guide was telling us more about Herod.
Yeah.
And that guy was a paranoid, crazy person. I think I want to say he had maybe a son killed and a wife because he was thinking he was paranoid about what they were scheming.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, you see that's the evil patriarchy right there. You have to do all these three things to keep your reign, and it's not based on virtue or merit.
And it's like you have to crush the will of men, and so it's like if they can't harness it, if they can't, when I say harnessed it, I like to think of they can't convince you to work for them, right? Then they have to distract you.
Mm-hmm.
And if they can't distract you, then they have to get rid of you. Right. And that's fundamentally what an evil patriarchy does. Right. And that's what he talks about. And so when he talks about Pharaoh and he talks about Absalom, right, they're completely two different characters. But we see that Absalom is not trying to destroy men, but he's trying to harness them. Right. And he's also trying, and so, but Pharaoh, we see Pharaoh, he tries to destroy men and to pacify them.
So yeah, and that's where he says here he differentiates between Pharaoh and like we're in an Absalom time. Yeah. He says, in our culture, because I obviously like Russia, China, North Korea got a different circumstance.
Yeah.
But he says here, but Absaloms are especially prevalent in times of disruption and disorder. They wait for a power vacuum created by weak and ineffective patriarchs.
Yes. And we could see that now. Well, and I go, okay, the question is, how is it that Absalom is successful? Why are these Absaloms successful in doing what they're doing?
Because there is a vacuum for them to fill.
Who's causing the vacuum right now in our culture?
There's a lot of fingers to be pointed.
I will point to one, and I'll start at one, and because the church is supposed to influence culture, not be influenced by culture. So the church has created this vacuum for men to leave the church and to find Absaloms outside of the church, the Andrew Tates, and I'm only talking about Christian men, not non-Christian men, okay? But Christian men are leaving the church because the Absalom's information seems more useful or is proven to be more useful and successful than the servant leader model that they've been given in the church. right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, well, we can't necessarily blame Andrew Tate for being successful, because if the church was doing its job with men and building Nehemiah's up, right, then less people from the church would be attracted to the Tate.
Exactly.
So when I say I'm pointing blame, I'm going to point blame ultimately on the authority that God has given to the church for not doing its job or meeting those men's needs, right? Not meeting where they're at and building them up. Later on in the book, he says something about like this, the effeminate church, and we'll get to that another day, but he says, you know, men have a choice to make. It's either reject Christianity or reject their masculinity, but both are a lie, right? Both are a false choice. You shouldn't have to reject your masculinity in order to be a Christian, but that's kind of like the way the church kind of leaves them feeling, and that just shows the error and the failure of the church when men feel like, okay, in order for me to embrace my masculinity, I need to be like Andrew Tate. And since the church is against Andrew Tate, then I must be against the church if I ultimately want to be like Andrew Tate. I want to be a masculine man like him.
Yeah, well, there's just the church is a vacuum of masculinity, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that's where I was going to read. So he's talking about Nehemiah here, Jerusalem burning. And so, yeah, this part is good. He goes, when the Babylonians burned Jerusalem, God raised up Nehemiah to rebuild it. But where are the Nehemiahs of our day? Where are the pastors who built with a trowel in one hand and fight with the sword in the other? Where are the Christian leaders who can rally men with words like this and mean it? When I saw their fear, I rose and spoke to the nobles and the officials and the rest of the people. Do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, your sons and your daughters, and your wives and your houses. That's Nehemiah 14 or 4:14. And the church is not known for such men, and so in the absence of godly Nehemiahs, young men are turning to Absaloms. Someone must help them repair what is broken and rebuild what has been lost. The clueless bastards are groping for fathers, and so they find Jordan Peterson, Rollo, Joe Rogan, pickup artists, and secular men's rights advocates. They discover these men listen, these men understand, these men advocate for them and defend them. These men are trying to fight and build. They have a hammer in one hand and a firearm in the other. And so these men steal their hearts. The church is in danger of losing another generation of men. We are in danger of prolonging our time in exile. We need Nehemiahs who will lead men in the work of rebuilding, but they are few. Many leaders in the church won't even acknowledge that Jerusalem is burning at all, and the ones that do can't honestly explain why. They are blind guides prescribing solutions that not only fail to address the core problem, but create more of that problem.
Yeah. And, you know, when I read that, I only got more mad, angry at the church. Like, man. So it's like, okay, if you don't like Rollo, if you're a pastor, you don't like Rollo, or you don't like Jordan Peterson, you don't like Joe Rogan, you don't like the pickup artist telling your young Christian men in your church how to get with women or how to have a successful relationship or intersexual dynamics, then the church should be teaching it to begin with then.
Mm-hmm.
And what he's saying is we don't have any Nehemiahs building up men, building up the church. So you are only giving this vacuum and you're allowing the Absaloms to take a place and have a voice.
Yeah, and I mean, you can't fault them. Like, it's not an apples to apples because Absalom was trying to undermine a kingdom, his father, and like literally steal a kingdom. But the examples today, they're not essentially malicious in that intent, but they are speaking what men want to hear. And they have a lot of good things to say, but at the same time, they're leading a lot of men astray. You know, I think about Andrew Tate now. Like, I don't have any issues with what he says currently. In terms of like, you know, his speaking on masculinity and stuff. But now that he's a Muslim, and apparently taking that seriously, he's going to lead men astray.
Yeah.
Like, that is a big problem. And like that, because he has such an influence, that's really a massive problem.
It is a big problem. And then I go and I think about it, like, okay, there's a failure of fathers in that too, right? For the kids that have their dad around, why are these kids drawn to Andrew Tate, not their father? Right? There's a failure of leadership there, right? Or if there, we are, and it's like when we listen to these influencers, we are giving them the authority to tell us what is good, what we ought to be doing, because we want to mimic that. Really, our authority should be, if we surrender authority, should be surrendered to God, and we should model our character in the way that we live off of God's character. People will say, well, what about Jesus? And I would say no, in the sense that if you're only looking at Jesus in the Gospels, then no, because that's a very different Jesus. Only one side of Jesus that is shown. A complete side of what masculinity is God's character throughout the entire Bible.
And I would actually say the Gospels have it all there. It's just they're very selective in stuff they pull out of the Gospels to describe Jesus.
I think a painting of Jesus in Revelations is a huge different than painting Jesus in the Gospels.
Yeah.
And that's where I'm saying that it's not complete.
Well, and that kind of leads us into chapter 2 anyway. Do we want to
you want me to go through the highlight?
Are there any questions we should hit on out of the workbook?
So highlight section, you guys, it goes, technology environmental shifts have resulted in men having such low testosterone levels that their grip strength is weaker than a woman's from a generation ago. The beauty of porn has led to erectile dysfunction in men not even out of their 20s. Social media and dating apps have made the relationship marketplace so extraordinarily competitive that some men just give up and either abandon the idea of sex or turn to virtual reality or even robots. Masculinity is shamed. Strong men are vilified as toxic. Those who speak out have their houses destroyed. Fathers are portrayed in mass media as an unnecessary buffoon, little better than one of the kids. Anyone esteeming motherhood as foundational to femininity is canceled. Domestic violence is regarded as exclusive of male sin. No fault divorce, welfare, and wickedly prejudicial custody laws incentivizes women to leave their husbands and to take everything they have, so they do, initiating nearly 80% of all divorces. Male suicides are heading for the skies, and no one cares. Right? And that's what we see as the outcome of evil patriarchy. Right? All these problems are stemming from what we're seeing as what is called an evil patriarchy.
And it really stems from what the second one, the pacify.
Yeah.
Is really, that's what the culture we're in. It's mostly pacification of men.
Yep. And so questions that he has. Question 1 is, why is patriarchy natural and inevitable? What are some ways in which even our world is patriarchal? Why is it that men often make it to the top of organizations and hierarchies? I think patriarchy is natural, inevitable, because it's by design. I mean, even amongst a group of friends, someone always is like the leader. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like the default leader. Now, it could be a default leader in not all areas, but let's say if it's like, okay, like when, here's a perfect example. When the Iron Disciples came to Vegas, I was the default leader because this is my area. I'm familiar with it, right? We went to the gym. I led the workout. Like I was the default leader in that scenario. We didn't have to pick who was going to lead. It just kind of naturally manifested that way, right?
Mm-hmm.
Although Joe and John left us when we were doing some other leg exercises, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. Well, I think it's obvious how it's in animals too. Like there is a hierarchy in everything pretty much we do.
Yeah, so it's a natural. I think guys are even find security and comfort in having that type of like that natural patriarchy.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
I think women like it too. Like,
I think women love it more than they want to acknowledge it. Right? What are some ways that even our world is patriarchal? I mentioned to you in the military. Mm-hmm. Military is very patriarchal, right?
Yeah, and I mean, it's everywhere. It's business world.
Yeah,
it's most marriages. Well, it's human relationships in general.
It's supposed to be.
Yeah, recently not so much, but I think we can just say into the last 5 minutes of human history. It's just built into the structure of everything.
Hey guys, I want to also throw this out there. If you have, I'm going to read these questions. If you want to get your answers read, please send a super chat. All right, support the channels. We suck at asking people to support our channels and send super chats. Yeah. But please do us a favor. If you want your answers read and you have one involved in the conversation, send a super chat. Support the channel. We're here for you. We would be doing this anyways, but help us out. Why is it that men often make it to the top of organizations and hierarchies? Because we're naturally created to. Yeah, we're created to lead. It's natural for us to want to rise to the top.
It's a trait of masculinity.
Exactly.
And if women are, if we're being honest, if a woman rises that same hierarchy, she's tapping into the masculinity.
Yeah.
Not into the femininity.
I think it's also God ordained it.
Mm-hmm.
And that God created us to do that, to rise, to lead. It's so natural for us.
And that goes in. I'll probably he kind of talks about that in the second chapter, but we'll get through these.
Yeah. So question 2, what are 3 ways evil patriarchy try to undermine God's patriarchy? What are some ways that you see them succeeding today? So harnessing them, right? I would say like college is a way to harness men's masculinity, because now you need this degree. We're going to go to this degree now we're going to tell you what a real man is and how you should operate. We're going to socially condition your behavior by teaching you this way. So that's one way to try to harness it, right? Porn, video games, any sedation is a way to try to pacify men, right? And to destroy men, transgenderism.
Yeah.
Literally want you to chop off your thingy and not be a man. We live in a society that's trying to make effeminate men, and effeminate men are easy to control.
Well, it's feminism in general, because like if we allow feminism in a society, naturally it's going to effeminate men. I don't think you can have feminism show up and then men just out masculinize the result of the changing females. No, it's obviously going to balance out where now the males are less masculine, thus turning them into basically trans.
Yeah. Like I made a joke. I was like, if you're like getting with the boss babe, you're like partly trans.
Dude, you get like brainwashed in that crap when you're like, I remember my friend and I were talking about this, like in college, like my brain was telling me, because of the brainwashing, like, oh, the type of chick like, I want this ambitious chick to like build an empire with. And I'm like thinking about that now, like, no way on planet Earth do I want that. I don't want another man.
let me take time to read a super chat real quick. $20. This must be from you guys, for you guys. Nick, He says, there are a few good men fighting for this, but many of us have been canceled, defrocked, suspended, and worse. Nothing new under the sun. I'm so thankful you guys are picking this up. Keep it up. Hey, we appreciate you, Nick.
Dude, we're gonna face ostracism. We're gonna face
Oh yeah.
You know, that's to be expected. Just look at what the disciples went through preaching the gospel. Like we should, like if our message is true, we should expect this. And I think that's why it takes a lot of voices. We need thousands of us doing the same thing, because no one can carry the torch by themselves. They're not gonna allow it. Like it needs to be mass numbers.
And I encourage you guys, like, again, we have no affiliates to this book by any means. You know, Mike, if you're listening, you know, we have no affiliates to you, right? Just tell everybody. You know, you can start a small group with your buddies. You could read a chapter a day with them, get the workbook, and just have a discussion with them, with your friends, right? Or your brothers, or even if you have teenage sons, this will be a good book to read with your sons and just kind of go over things with your sons, you know? And so it's like, yeah, we may get canceled, we may get suspended, we may get whatever. But if you do your job and you take up the mantle, you become a Nehemiah, right? Then you can make the change. We only got 6 people watching us, but these 6 people watching us, we get to inspire. And now we want those 6 that are watching us, or 5 now, to get the book and then make 6 more people, read it to 6 more people, influence 6 more people, and then let it grow like that. Like that's how we're gonna change it. We're not gonna be an Andrew Tate. We're not gonna be a Rollo Tomasi. We're not gonna be these guys that have these huge followings. Because we're saying things that are really countercultural, and we're saying things that are even counter to the red pill, even though we align with them in many areas and we agree with them in many areas. The
message will never be popular because it doesn't it doesn't look like you're succeeding in the worldly sense.
Yeah.
You know, the worldly sense success looks basically like Andrew Tate. And what we're trying to communicate is literally going to look like the opposite of that in many cases. And so it's never going to be a popular message. And that's why we need all of you guys, you know, spreading it, because it's, you know, ultimately, and part of it's like holding each other accountable, because we're all going to be tempted by the Andrew Tates of the world and to, you know, want to maybe mimic that, want to, you know, it's attractive. And part of that is we need to hold each other accountable.
I like this right here. Invincible Muscle Cars Garage. Be the kind of man your sons could look up to, and they won't be swayed by scam artists like Tate. Yeah. That's the type of men that we want to be, right?
By the way, Nick, thanks so much for that super chat, brother.
Yeah, Nick. That is awesome. Go to my channel. No, I'm kidding. Producer Dave, can you pull up 2 Samuel? All right, so this is the study of the word, that section that he has in the book study guide. He goes, the question is, how does Absalom win the hearts over men? So Mike, can we read this?
Yeah. So after this, Absalom got himself a chariot and horses and 50 men to run before him. And Absalom used to rise early and stand beside the way of the gate. And when any man had a dispute to come before the king for judgment, Absalom would call to him and say, "From what city are you?" And when he said, "Your servant is of such and such tribe in Israel," Absalom would say to him, "See, your claims are good and right, but there is no man designated by the king to hear you." Then Absalom would say, that I were a judge in the land. Then every man with a dispute or cause might come to me, and I would give him justice. Whenever a man came near to pay homage to him, he would put out his hand and take hold of him and kiss him. Thus Absalom did to all of Israel who came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel.
So what we see here is, one, let's point out a few things. Can you scroll back up, Dave? One, Absalom had a chariot. So he got himself something that looked of status, right? So think of a Bugatti, right? The chariot is the Bugatti, right? And he had 50 men run before him, you know. So he had a group of guys that supported him, right? So it's kind of like there was this like prank that was done, like they had this guy being followed with a video camera, like a movie camera, right? And everybody thought like he was somebody famous, and they just started making up rumors like, oh, that's such and such from that movie.
Oh yeah, I saw that prank. Yeah,
right. And it's kind of like that. So Absalom created status, or the appearance of status. Although he was King David's son, he didn't have authority. All right.
Mm-hmm.
So he created himself this image of status. And then he went and he met the men. He didn't wait for the men to come to him. He went out and he met the men, heard their problems. And he's like, hey, guys, man, if I could fix the world, if I could fix it, I would fix the problems for you.
It's literally he just pulled off what every politician does today.
Exactly. And in doing so, although the men didn't get their problem solved, they gave in to him because he goes, man, at least they are hearing my problems. Right? And that's what kind of happens in these influencer spaces. These men are not going to solve your problems because they can't. Right? And they can't, you know, they could give you advice, but they're not going to solve your problems. But just for the simple fact that they hear you out and they empathize with your struggles, we tend to default to them as a leader. They get to steal our hearts that way. But they never changed any of your problems. So your problems are still the same. And all they said is like, basically, bro, I know exactly what you're going through. Man, I feel for you.
It's basically like catharsis. Like,
yeah. So, you know, that's Absalom. Can we go to Nehemiah 2?
We're on it.
Dave, the producer. I think I'm gonna have to send Dave a Mr. Producer hat.
Yeah.
And get him to wear my Mr. Producer hat. All right. Can you read that one too? 15
11.
through 6.
15, you said?
Yeah.
15. Then I went up in the night by the valley and inspected the wall, and I turned back and entered by the valley gate.
No.
11, okay.
Samuel 2, or 2 Samuel 15, 2 through 6.
2 Samuel now.
I'm sorry.
Oh, we were just in 2 Samuel.
I'm sorry, Nehemiah 2, 11 through 20.
So I went to Jerusalem and was there 3 days. Then I arose in the night, I and a few men with me, and I told no one what my God had put into my heart to do for Jerusalem. There was no animal with me but the one on which I rode. I went out by night by the valley gate to the dragon spring and to the dung gate, and I inspected the walls of Jerusalem. They were broken down, and its gates had been destroyed by fire. Then I went on to the fountain gate and to the king's pool, but there was no room for the animal and no underpass or under me to pass. Then I went up in the night by the valley and inspected the wall, and I turned back and entered by the valley gate, and so returned. And the officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing. I had not yet told the Jews and priests and the nobles, the officials, and the rest who were to do the work. Then I said to them, you see the trouble we are in, how Jerusalem lies in ruins with its gates burned. Come, let us build the wall of Jerusalem, that we may no longer suffer derision. And I told them of the hand of God, of the hand of my God that had been upon me for good, and also of the words that the king had spoken to me. And they said, let us rise up and build. So they strengthened their hands for the good work. But when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite servant and Geshem the Arab heard of it, they jeered at us and despised us and said, what is this thing you are doing? Are you rebelling against the king? And I replied to them, the God of the heaven will make us prosper, and we his servants will arise and build. but you have no portion or right to claim in Jerusalem.
And then can we go to Nehemiah 4, 1 through 23? So, and as he's doing that, I want us to understand okay, one, Nehemiah saw a problem. He saw a problem and said, no, we need to build this up. We need to fix this problem. Right. And he was met with some adversity of the Arab tribes. Like, what are you doing? You're going against the king. He's like, no, I'm doing this because God told me to do this. This is what we're called to do. So let's continue.
What was it? Was this 1 through what?
23.
Okay. Now, when Sanballat heard that we were building the wall, he was angry and greatly enraged, and he jeered at the Jews. And he said in the presence of his brothers and of the army of Samaria, what are these feeble Jews doing? Will they restore it for themselves? Will they sacrifice? Will they finish up in a day? Will they revive the stones out of the heaps of rubbish and bird ones at that? Tobiah was behind him and said, yes, what they are building, if a fox goes up on it, he will break down the stone wall. Hear, O our God, for we are despised. Turn back their taunt on their own heads and give them up to be plundered in a land where they are captives. Do not cover their guilt, and let not their sin be blotted out from your sight, for they have provoked you to anger in the presence of the builders. So we built the wall, and the wall was joined together to half of its height, for the people had mind to work. But when Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabs and the Ammonites and the Ashdodites heard that they were repairing the walls of Jerusalem, was going forward, and that the breaches were beginning to be closed, they were very angry, and they all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and to cause confusion in it. And we prayed to our God and set a guard as a protection against them day and night. In Judah it was said, the strength of those who bear the burdens is failing. There is too much rubble. By ourselves we are not able to rebuild the wall. And our enemies said, they will not know or see till we come along or come among them and kill them and stop the work. At that time, the Jews who lived near them came from all directions and said to us 10 times, you must return to us. So in the lowest parts of the space behind the wall, in open places, I stationed the people by their clans, with their swords, their spears, and their bows. And I looked and arose and said to the nobles and to the officials and to the rest of the people, do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. When our enemies heard that it was known to us and that God had frustrated their plan, we all returned to the wall, each to his work. From that day on, half my servants worked on construction, and half held spears, shields, bows, and coats of mail. And the leaders stood behind the whole house of Judah who were building on the wall. Those who carried burdens were loaded in such a way that each labored on the work with one hand and held his weapon with the other. And each of the builders had his sword strapped at his side while he built. The man who sounded the trumpet was beside me, and I said to the nobles and to the officials and to the rest of the people, work is great and widely spread, and we are separated on the wall far from one another. In the place where you hear the sound of the trumpet, rally to us there. Our God will fight for us. So we labored at the work, and half of them held the spears from break of dawn until the stars came out. I also said to the people at that time, let every man and his servant pass the night within Jerusalem, that they may be guard for us by night and may labor by day. So neither I nor my brothers nor my servants nor the men of the guard who followed me, none of us took off our clothes. Each kept his weapon at his right hand. That's pretty savage.
That is savage. If you scroll up, you can see that there was a lot of confusion. There was a lot of doubt in the midst. And Nehemiah just kind of kept everybody on focus. No, we're going to complete this. We're going to fulfill this task. This is what we are called to do, right? And if we're called to make disciples of men, if we are called to help lead men and help men be the best version of themselves, to uphold this biblical patriarchy, this good thing that God created, we have to be able to have our weapon in one hand and be doing work in the other. It's not, you don't get to okay, well, these guys are just going to fight for us and then this guys are going to build it. No. You have to do both. And It's tiresome. It's real tiresome. And you see that they're exhausted, they're doing this, but when they do it, it's successful. It took longer. It wasn't the easy road. It was a harder road, but it was successful in the end.
And I think just it's a good analogy of like what is going to happen in today's culture. Like you're not going to be attacked with weapons necessarily being a Christian, but the enemy is going to be coming at you with weapons. And, whether that, is something from culture, just lies, cultural lies that are accepted as truth. Like we have all these different things coming at us that we need to be prepared for and have a defense for, security for.
Yeah.
And, that's why I think one of the most destructive things is that unfortunately the church kind of has done when you push men out the church, like a lot of men aren't taking the ambition to go solve the problem of lack of community and fellowship. So they're kind of doing their stuff alone.
Yeah.
The Christian walk alone, which just leaves them so vulnerable to those attacks. I think even with marriage, like I remember James talking about how like the old days of marriage, like you had a community of support around your marriage, just besides you two. And today it's like people are doing their marriages completely alone as well. And it just shows the results.
Yeah. Yep. And it's crazy is that, we see this in our society today. Are we going to fall for the Absaloms? Or are we going to choose to be a Nehemiah? And there's this line in the sand that we gotta, like, every guy kind of has to cross. The Absaloms don't provide an outcome. And going to an Absalom is really kind of lazy because you're not doing any work.
A lot of times you already know the answers, like the stuff that you're listening to from them, like you don't need to be told it again. Like, the answers.
And it kind of allows people to stay stagnant and not do the work. But being a Nehemiah is laborsome. Is not going to be easy. It's going to be tiresome, right? You're going to get up. There's going to be days that you're not going to want to do it. But the reward is great in the end. And so, I mean, when I read this, I'm like, man, I don't want to be an Absalom. I want to be a Nehemiah. Like, I want that drive like Nehemiah had. And I think that's kind of where you and I kind of like, in the rest of the Iron Disciples, John and Joe, where we kind of fall into place here is that we listen to the Absaloms. We may not have followed the Absaloms. We listened to what they said, but we're like, we want to be Nehemiahs though. Like your information that you give is good. That's great. Thank you. But we're going to go build something now.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to go build up our community. We're going to go build up these walls, right? And we're going to get attacked. That's why we got our weapon in that one hand, and we're our hammer in the other. We're going to be building things, and we're going to be building our community of men. And I think that's kind of where guys have to decide: are you going to fall for an Absalom, or are you going to be a Nehemiah? Which one do you choose? One requires very little effort, and one requires a huge sacrifice.
Yep. And you might not see the reward of that sacrifice in this life.
Exactly. It may not. You may not see the reward or the goal complete in your lifetime, but the work that you do may be completed in your grandchildren's lifetime. And a lot of times when guys talk about like dating and society and culture, we talk about the right now issue. But we don't really think about our children's children. We think like, oh, dating and relationships suck right now, so just quit it now. But nobody wants to fix it so that our kids don't have to have that problem. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
Chapter 2. You want to hit chapter 2 real quick?
Yeah, we're an hour in, so let's move on
Yeah.
to 2.
So chapter 2 is titled "Masculinity is Very Good." I'm going to read the quick summary. We'll just go over what we liked about it, and then we'll answer the questions. So the quick summary says, to understand what we're supposed to do now, we need to go back to the beginning. The answer of our current culture's masculinity crisis are found in Genesis and its plan for humanity. Why did God create man? God created him to be for productive representative leadership. Men are given more aggressive instincts than women, so they can be rulers in their work to subdue and fill the entire world. This is what dominion is, and this is very good. One of the highlights he points out is the reason that God created man on earth, according to Genesis, is for productive representation of rulership, right? This is what it means to exercise dominion, to fruitfully order the world in God's stead. What did you get out of chapter 2? What did you like about chapter 2? Because I know you brought up, you liked how it really kind of went back to Genesis.
Yeah, well, I think it points a good picture to, like, we always talk about Jesus in terms of what we're supposed to model, which I think is a fine thing, but I think it misses some of the full picture, because he says, like, in the beginning, Genesis contains the blueprint for recovering manhood. And this chapter is great just because it kind of goes in, like, we're made in the image of God, and so that's more than just the image of Jesus. We're talking a Trinity here.
Yeah.
And so there's more aspects to this. And I think it also shows the, like, studying Genesis is important. Like, I had highlighted, he said here, yes, but Genesis is the seed of all scripture. Everything grows from there, including the New Testament. Without understanding Genesis, you cannot adequately understand the rest of God's word.
Yeah.
So I think just I never thought that was a kind of an eye opener for me. I never thought of it that way. You always just get, like, because Jesus was that physical man on earth living your life. That's the only image you're kind of really referring to when you're thinking about image of God and how you are supposed to be. And it just kind of opened my mind to, like, look into that more, because that's too narrow.
It is, and I like how he says it's true, but it's incomplete.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? And he's like, it's true, but it's incomplete. I like how he talks about dominion, rule the earth, right? So he goes, evangelical Christians today speak of this commission in terms of stewardship. This is basically true, but in terms of stewardship mutes the far more forceful term that God actually uses. Rule the earth or have dominion mean to reign with kingly power. It refers to not just to the authority, but the authority backed by might. For example, one from Jacob shall have dominion and destroy the remnant from the city. Numbers 24:19 emphasizes added below. He may also rule from sea to sea. Let the nomads of the desert bow before him, and his enemies lick the dust. So I love the fact that he emphasizes, one, we're supposed to rule the earth, and then we're supposed to subdue it. It means to vanquish or even forcefully put down. Elsewhere in the scripture, it is used in the reference to conquering and even enslavement. Now, you're proposing to subjugate for yourselves the people of Judah and Jerusalem for male and female slaves, 2 Chronicles. And what I found interesting is, like, men don't have the idea of rulership and subduing has been considered toxic. And our culture has literally told us, even in the churches to a degree, that this trait that God has given us, that this job that God has given us, if we exercise it, it's bad. That we're not supposed to rule anything. that we're not supposed to subdue anything, but God literally commanded men to rule and subdue the earth for a good patriarchy, not an evil patriarchy.
And he had this kind of bolded here. The reason that God creates man on the earth, according to Genesis, is for productive, representative rulership. This is what it means to exercise dominion, to fruitfully order the world in God's stead. So you're made in the image of God. Your duty is to order, or be a dominion, to exercise dominion, which is fruitfully ordering the world.
Yeah, and I love this part too. It says, men today desperately need to hear this message. There is no hint in the Bible that your aggressive instincts are a result of the fall.
Yeah, exactly.
And we get taught so much that it's not true, that if we're aggressive, then it's a toxic trait. And he kind of gets into like sex, in other words, is the engine for dominion. What'd you think about that line on page 37?
That's on the next chapter there.
Yeah, it kind of. Oh yeah,
I'm not that far in. I gave my book away. Remember?
Oh yeah. It leads into it. So it's really interesting that he uses that. Shout out to Afi. I see you in there. But
I think it just shows, like, I like to think about a lot of these, like masculinity, for example. Like they do talk, like we have this term toxic masculinity. I think, like with the fall, I think it just gave there's like a good and bad version of like everything. So I think we see like masculinity, and you could call, patriarchy maybe falls under this same umbrella. Like its original intent was good, and how it's exercised is good. Like masculinity, like it provides, you could say testosterone, the chemical behind it, provides men with like ambition, you could say aggressive tendencies that, essentially drive us to provide, protect, and build for our families. Now, the flip side of it, the toxic side of it, is men that use it to basically just gain worldly possessions, sleep with as many women as possible, and
did Mike freeze on me? Mike, are you there?
I think we're back.
You're back.
I think we're back.
You're back. You want to finish off your thought?
I don't know where I died, but I think, I was just kind of saying there's that duality to masculinity and kind of testosterone and what it does for men. Like we have the positive side of it is we provide, protect, we build for our families, society. And the toxic side of it is that tyrannical patriarchy, the just hedonism, the, those negative aspects that follow those two items that men will go down the path with, that Satan wants us to go down.
Well, I think it kind of boils down to, and the Bible says, do the work as if you're doing it unto the Lord, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if we're doing it for our own self-seeking interest, then we're doing it wrong, right? How can I gain from this? Who can I screw over to get where I want? Like that's not how good patriarchy works. And so it kind of is like masculinity and patriarchy in itself is neither good or evil. It depends on how we choose to exercise and use it, determines whether it's good or evil. Right?
I like this line here. It says, "You are not, in other words, a defective woman."
Yeah. Yep. Do you actually want to read a little bit about that? Because there's a little bit more than that there.
Yeah. So after that, it says, "Your desire to conquer and to subdue, to hew down and to build up, to form and to shape has nothing to do with the curse or, the fall. It's man's natural pre-fall created purpose. You yearn to bend the world to your will because Adam was created to bend the world to his will. Where things go wrong is not with our natural yearnings, but with our wills themselves.
Yeah.
Adam was made to exercise his will on behalf of God. This is what a son does, as we will see later on, and as we will also see the image of God is directly connected to sonship. But Adam refused, and so we refuse. We are true sons of Father Adam, doing what he did and following in his ways. This is why we can no longer bring heaven to earth, and God had to send his own son, as the new Adam to take over that process.
So it says, like, nonetheless, our masculine natures is how we are designed to image God as man. So that drive that we have, that masculine drive, that that desire for leadership, right? The desire to subdue and conquer the world is a trait that God gave us, and that's how we, are able to exhibit, that image of God, because He wanted us to do that. How we choose to do it either glorifies Him or it shames Him, right?
Yep.
And so in the workbook it says, thus there is nothing shameful about your masculine nature, about your desiring to strive to overcome, to harness. On the contrary, masculine nature is glorious because it images the God of glory. It is what we are created to be and to do. Even now, as you seek to honor God, you are a replica made to resemble Him. How much more when you see Him face to face? How much more when you see Him face to face? And the questions that he asks is, how are men designed to be productive, representative rulers?
How are men designed to be productive, well, I mean, I guess we're designed in God's image. So
Yeah.
Our natural inclinations are these things. Whether it is to build, ultimately we're builders. And I think we have natural inclinations towards, the ambitious nature. And I think it all comes down to kind of God's reproductive strategy with us too, and how He designed that, because ultimately it comes from like our sex drive, I would say.
Well,
and
that's
our
what
desire
he says,
to build a
right?
family.
That's what he says. It comes from that drive. Sex is an engine for dominion, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I find it interesting that you bring that up. Is like, well, productive. The question is productive, representative rulers. Well, how are we going to rule if we're not productive enough to have people underneath us to rule or to govern, right? To lead.
Mm-hmm.
So, whether it's your career or you're being a father, right? And you have dominion over your household, right? That's a representation of God's relationship with His church.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So
everything is just like it's like that Russian doll that there's like a smaller version, bigger.
Yeah.
It's like, first, like, can you have dominion over your own life and keep your stuff together? And then it's like, all right, can you handle a wife? Okay. Can you handle now kids? Okay. Now maybe like you can help lead a church or lead a church. And then, I think it just shows, it just starts really small and then it zooms all the way out to God's dominion over us.
Yeah. And so the second question is, how is the word dominion used in the Bible? What connotations does it have? In the book, he says, it talks about like dominion, rule the earth, or have dominion, meaning to reign with kingly power, meaning that the power that we have is not necessarily our own power of authority, but from the power that backs us up, right? So it's like it's God's authority given to us to rule. So it's like we are ambassadors of His authority as kings are on earth to Him, right? So God is the God of all man and all kings, right? We are just a representation of His rulership, right? And see, this is where we have to be careful, though, because, and this is where it tends to get perverted and twisted, is that God has given men this position of authority to be his ambassadors and his basically image him on earth, and how we choose to use our rulership, our will. So it's not the desire that we have to rule, but the will that is perverted, and that will could be misguided, right? That could be self-seeking. That could be, very hedonistic. But it's like, God doesn't take away gifts that he gives you, right? The gifts are not void. They don't. So like I look at like musicians and singers, right? R. Kelly had a great voice. R. Kelly had a great voice. God gifted him that voice and talent to sing. But how did he use it? He abused it. He did bump and grind and booty shaking music and peeing on little girls, right? Like, so he was given this talent. He was given this gift of music, right? And authority with his music, but he perverted it for his own will. So our desire to rule is God-given, and how we rule determines whether or not we are building up a good patriarchy or an evil patriarchy.
And we see the failings in most of the patriarchs in the Old Testament. Like, with, great power comes great responsibility. And I think a lot of us aren't cut out for it. And, ultimately, just look at when Israel, God was their king. And then they're like, oh, we need a king. Like, we need to be like the other nations. And then, look what happens.
Exactly. So last 15 minutes, let's kind of just wrap it up. Let's just kind of go over the first two chapters. Like, what did you get the most out of it? What did you like out of it? Yeah.
Well, number one, I would just recommend first check this book out, guys. I think we're going to be doing multiple of these. I don't know. We'll probably do 2 chapters at a time, whatever we think's best. So join us in this, because we'd love to have the discussion with you as well and chat. I think this.
You guys can get it on Amazon for like $15.
Yeah, I got it like shipped in 2 days.
I got it like I think a day before you did, right?
Yep.
And so like we want you guys to read along with us. And be involved with us. It's kind of like what we're kind of doing is like a book read, like chicks do, like book clubs, but we're doing like a book club to help build men up. So be involved in the conversation. Take your time to get this book. We're only going to do this like once a week. And I think we could just stick to Tuesdays, maybe, if that works, so it doesn't take away from anything else that you guys have going on. But we'll do like every Tuesday. We're going to read 2 chapters, and we're going to go over 2 chapters of this book and really get what, talk about what we get out of it. And, who knows? Maybe Mike Foster will hop on a podcast with us and talk with them. And maybe probably towards the end or something, when we kind of go through the whole review of it. I'm already on like chapter 8, and I'll tell you right now.
Flying through it.
Oh, dude, I love this book. It's a great read. And I love reading it with the study guide, because it helps me remember key things, because he gives a lot of information in here, and the study guide kind of helps you reinforce those things, that need to stick out in the book. And these questions I've been mulling over myself. And luckily for me, I call Mike in the morning and be like, hey, man, I read this part. Did you get to this part yet? He's like, no, I haven't got there yet, you asshole. Slow
down. I got 3 of us reading out of the same book right now.
And so I think this is a great book that you guys could take home and read with your friends, with your brothers, or even just join the conversation with us, every week, every Tuesday. I preview, just so you guys can kind of get a heads up, the next 2 chapters is Sex is Very Good and The War on Sex. And I will say this, chapter 4, The War on Sex, I highlighted so much in my book because there's a lot of good things in there. So that's that.
Yeah. But yeah, I think as far as the, what I kind of liked about it, number one, I think just grounding it in Genesis, like masculinity and like the image of God as men, I think was huge. Like it was just a good thing for me to even think about. Like I never really you always just you see everything through the frame of Jesus, and I think wow, that's good. There's just more to it. So definitely encourage you to take a deeper dive into Genesis just because of that, and also just showing how the patriarchy, the concept of patriarchy, it's inevitable, and we have control over if that becomes toxic or not, and or evil, if you want to use that term, and just realizing how those different ways it becomes evil are manipulated. As we talked about, harnessing them for their own evil, pacifying them, or just simply destroying them, and ultimately we as men are the ones that really matter in these situations. Like we are the leaders, and how societies treat us, how we allow them to treat us, will dictate the future of that society.
I want to point out that I'm going to just read this part where because you brought it up about Jesus, and I want people to understand what he's saying when he says it. He says, we have seen that this involves bringing order by forming and filling in Genesis. But we also learn a great deal about God's dominion throughout Scripture. This is a point lost in modern Christianity, where the focus is almost exclusively on the model of Jesus in the Gospels. But while that model is, of course, perfect, it is not complete. It is a model of God as the second Adam, humbling himself to correct the mistakes of the first. It is not yet a model of him ruling over the world as Adam should have. Jesus did not take up the rule of Adam until after his resurrection from the dead and ascension into heaven. And I think that kind of hits at what you were saying, is that, we kind of like, we kind of say, oh, Jesus, and oh, that's awesome, Apex, that's great, join the read.
Yeah.
We think that Jesus is the model, and although Jesus is perfect, it's incomplete, because we only talk about Jesus in the Gospels that tend to be not the ruler Jesus, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, but that servant Jesus, in a sense, that who came here and was a sacrificial lamb for our sins. And there's
Jesus is very vocal in Revelation too, and that's usually forgotten.
Exactly. Like me and you talk about it, like which Jesus you talking about? Gospel Jesus or Revelation Jesus? Because Revelation Jesus is coming to war. Like he's not. There's nothing meek about him in that one. So yeah, you guys, I really encourage you guys to join the read and be a part of this study as we're going through it. Any last thoughts, Mike? You want to wrap up? Because I got to go to the gym and have a walk.
Yeah, you better hit the gym. No, I think that's a good start to this. I was wondering how it'd go, first kind of book club idea, but I think this is awesome. I'm glad you brought up the book. As far as kind of what's going on, John and Joe will be back next time. They are back after, they had to deal with their father passing away, dealing with all the loose ends of that, you could say, and now they're back in town. So we're going to have another podcast Thursday night with Martine, who we've had on in the past, and we're going to specifically talk about courting today in kind of this modern culture and stepping outside of dating. Like, she's from the Eastern culture, so she kind of talks a lot about how dating is a Western concept to begin with, and we'll see if we can gain some advice on like how do you even court in today's world. So I'm not even sure the answer to that. So that'll be the plan Thursday night. Yeah,
that sounds interesting. I don't court anymore, so
yeah, I'm kind of curious to hear what you say. Like in my mind, I'm like, there's no woman that's going to sign up for this courting idea anyway. So, because they have their expectations not in that world either. So it sounds like, I'm just kind of curious how it's going to go.
I like how Invincible Muscle Cars or Extreme Muscle Cars, courting isn't even biblical either.
Yeah. Well, that's the one thing the Bible is not like. It doesn't ever, maybe I'm wrong, but it doesn't seem to talk about mate selection. Because I think back then it was just kind of like, here's your wife, make it work. You look at like Isaac and Rebecca. I think it's Rebecca, right? His dad's servant just goes into town and like finds a girl by the well that God points out to him and like, bring him back to Isaac. Here you go.
Yep.
So there's not this like we just live in such a different time, and we have to deal with the cards we've been dealt, and it's a challenge.
Yeah, no. So that's gonna be interesting. That's gonna be interesting. Take you guys have on it. I'm gonna tune in for that. I know our buddy Rob wants to do a show with us.
Okay.
I'll probably have a meeting with him sometime this week to kind of see what he wants to talk about. Schedule that out. But next Tuesday, guys, we will be doing chapter 3 and chapter 4. I'm probably just going to be really like working on some stuff at home. Nothing like crazy or anything, but just kind of like really working on this book, making sure the notes. I probably won't be on too much, but you can always catch me on the socials. I'll say something that's triggering on Twitter, like normal. I'm trying to connect with Mike Foster, obviously, and Pastor Joel Webbin on this topic on biblical masculinity, biblical patriarchy, and we also wanted to talk to them about servant leader model. And so I'm going to be kind of working behind the scenes doing that with those guys and trying to get that organized so we could have that stream soon. So if you guys don't see me, it's mainly because I'm just working behind the backgrounds. So
awesome. Well, at the very least, guys, we'll see you next Tuesday.
All right. Peace.